Now for this hour, we start with Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has said that he still lacks clear answers from Washington on what security guarantees the United States would provide if Russia were to attack Ukraine again. He has asked directly how the U.S. would respond and how any guarantees would work in practice, questions that Kyiv says are essential for deterrence and peace negotiations. Let's listen in.
Є питання, на яке поки що я не можу отримати відповідь. Не можу, це не значить, що хтось не хоче. Ми просто ще не дійшли до цього. Питання в всіх гарантій безпеки. Коли у тебе не НАТО, так? Як НАТО? У тебе гарантії безпеки як НАТО? Хтось каже, може це ще й краще. Я не знаю. Я не берусь оцінювати. Я берусь оцінювати тільки одне. Відповідь на запитання, що зробить Сполучені Штати Америки, якщо Росія знов прийде з агресією. Що ці гарантії безпеки зроблять? Як це спрацює? Як спрацюють партнери всі? Яким чином, якою силою вони зупинять Москву? Конкретно. Мені здається, на це потрібно отримати відповідь. Нехай вона буде не публічна, але нехай вона буде закріплена в якихось документах.
Kyiv is in talks with Washington on a legally binding security pact that Ukrainian officials say should include NATO-style mutual defense commitments, be ratified by the U.S. Congress, and clearly spell out steps the U.S. and partners would take if Russia renewed aggression. Zelenskyy and U.S. envoys have discussed draft documents in Berlin, and ongoing negotiations are underway, but details remain unresolved, and Zelenskyy wants specifics soon to reassure Ukrainians and allies alike. Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Mohammad Osman. He's an international relations expert, joins us live from Cairo. Thank you very much, Mr. Mohammad Osman, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, how aligned do you think all the parties, especially U.S., Russia, and Ukraine are in terms of, how close are they towards peace? And also, what challenges does Ukraine face in securing clear security guarantees for themselves?
Thank you for having me, Asuma. Always a pleasure to be with you. Of course, now the discussions about security guarantees take center stage within the negotiations between the Ukrainian and the American sides, and the Europeans, of course, with regards to the efforts to push for a peaceful settlement of the Ukrainian conflict at the moment. Ukraine, of course, is understandably pushing for very stern security guarantees that will be legally binding through a treaty of some sort between Ukraine and the United States that is supposed to be, according to Ukraine and even to some American sources, that the proposed guarantees will be equivalent to the mutual defense provisions of Article 5 of the NATO Charter. Of course, Ukraine is pushing hard to achieve this. This will be a huge achievement for Ukraine if it is solidified or agreed upon. However, on the other hand, it is highly questionable whether Russia will actually accept such an arrangement. I do believe that Russia will definitely oppose any attempts to provide Ukraine with any blanket security guarantees that are equivalent to the Article 5 clause of the NATO Charter, because basically it defeats the purpose of the idea of Ukrainian neutrality. It defeats the purpose of the idea of the entire war, which is to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO. So if Ukraine will be accorded with, or rewarded with rather, privileges of membership, basically without having membership of the North Atlantic Treaty Alliance, then Moscow basically fought this entire war for nothing. So it is inconceivable that Russia, in my opinion, would accept such an arrangement at the moment. In Miami, in a few days, it is expected that a Russian delegation will arrive and it will hold talks with the Americans in order to review what the Ukrainians and the Europeans have provided, their input, the input they have provided to the American side, and to discuss them in the as part of efforts to reach an agreement. I do believe that the Russians will oppose that. We've all heard yesterday President Putin's speech at the Russian Ministry of Defense, very defiant, speaking about the necessity of achieving the goals of the so-called special military operation, and adamantly defending the military posture of his country with regards to pursuing the goals of the Russians in the war, basically saying that if we do not achieve them through peaceful means, we will achieve them through violence or military means, basically. So I think this is an indication that Russia is not really willing to compromise on its core positions, that is NATO, Ukraine's neutrality, and also its acquisition of the entirety of the Donbass.
And lastly, how might, now it's been almost 4 years of this war and back and forth without any breakthrough again and again and again. So how might delays again in finalizing this peace pact, security guarantees, everything influence the negotiations this weekend?
It seems the Americans are bracing for the possibility of the negotiations basically failing. And that is why they are reportedly preparing a new round of sanctions to impose on the Russians as a means to punish them for refusing the peace proposal, if it ever comes to that. And if this happens, Asuma, that means that we will be back to square one, basically. The Americans trying to ante up the pressure on the Russians once again. And of course, the Russians will resist and they will reject the American and European pressures, and they will continue the war. The Russians hold the battlefield initiative, and they will just keep improving their situation on the battlefield, capturing more towns, more cities, more territories, which will make Ukraine's position even weaker and more precarious in any future negotiations.
Yes.
And then the Americans will, at the same time,
Yes.
be unwilling to provide Ukraine once again with unlimited military support, as the Biden administration used to do, for example, over the past 3.5 years. So they will go back to pressuring the Ukrainians once again. So we will be in this vicious circle, and the biggest loser at the end of the day, Asuma, will
Yes.
be Ukraine. They will be forced to accept a settlement that will be even worse than this one if
Yes.
the negotiations fail this time.
100%. Very insightful and extremely timely. With that, I would like to thank Mr.